you hear some stories of families coming around and of doing that work and reconciling with their kids, but then there's others that may never, or never do, and that may be the case with my parents because of the influence that they've had in the community, which is unfortunate, but it's also been what's propelled me into the work that I do now with so many other people. And I think when I wrote Refocusing My Family, I felt like it was important to be a voice because, that book is my story. It's my growing up and coming out story. And I felt like it was important to be a voice for other people. And then I think when it published, I quickly realized, like, this is not just my story.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. A Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges, spirituality, ADHD, or maybe just family, travel, and logistics. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison, with your mystery meat sandwich.
Greetings, compadres. So my business manager, Carolyn, told me that she reached out to my guest today on Instagram and told her that we had read her book in the Boozeless Book Club. And wait for it, my guest responded and said that she would be happy to come on the podcast. What? So I am so thrilled because I found my guest's first book so moving, and I just about peed my pants when Carolyn told me all of this. And so, as you know, one of my pillars here on the show is deconstruction and reconstruction of faith. And of course, another one is, self-development in general, realizing who we are, encouraging each other to become the best version of ourselves, all that good stuff, right? First, and I hope this is okay. First, I want to say welcome to Amber Cantorna. Did I say it right, Amber?
You did. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, awesome. And what I would love to do, this quote from your first book, I have to read it if that's okay. It is like my favorite. It just pierced me like a knife. And so I'd love to start with that because I usually start with a quote. And of course, I had to pick one of yours. So this is from page 121 of Refocusing My Family, which I'll read. I'll get into that subtitle and everything in 1 second. But this is just to kind of set the tone. Page 121. Everyone around me believed exactly the same way I did. Without exposure to diversity, people of color, people with disabilities, etc., I wasn't able to appreciate and respect all the different shapes and forms that God comes in. Instead, I was taught to love everyone, but with the condition that we love them in order to make them like us. Good Christians who love God and do what the Bible commands. If they weren't Christians, then the goal was to convince them to want to become one. And I resonated with that like nobody's business. Mm-hmm. And so here she is. I give to you, Amber Cantorna, and I'm going to read a quick bio, and then I'm going to let her have the floor and just kind of launch in and talk about her background. So Amber is a national speaker, a gatherer of outcasts and misfits, and the author of Unashamed, a coming out guide for LGBTQ Christians, and also the first book, which is what I just read that little quote from, that portion from, is called Refocusing My Family, Coming Out, Being Cast Out, and Discovering the True Love of God. As a gay woman living with late-stage Lyme disease, Amber specializes in bringing messages of diversity, hope, and self-acceptance to those who have been pushed to the margins. She's the host of the Unashamed Love Collective, a safe haven for LGBTQ plus people and allies to build supportive community. She also leads cultivating community retreats, small, intimate group gatherings, that build lasting relationships with like-minded people. Her third book will release in October of 2023. And so you can follow her at Amber N. Cantorna, or also you can learn more about her work at ambercantorna.com. And so it is with joy, with pleasure, and with lots of fangirling that I introduce to you Amber. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much. Wow, what an intro. Thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely so thrilled to have you here. And if you would be so willing to share some of your background with us, however much you're comfortable with, I'd be honored.
Sure. Yeah, like you mentioned, I grew up in this Christian bubble, really. I was born in Montana, but from the time I was 3, we moved to California because my father had taken a position at Focus on the Family. And for those who may not be familiar with, it's an organization founded by James Dobson that proclaims to focus on family and marriage values, but is primarily one type of family. It's traditional marriage, one man, one woman. And so that, the culture of Focus on the Family is something that's globally known. I don't know how much you've been influenced by that personally, but that was the world that I grew up in from the age of 3 on. And my dad, for my entire life, has worked at Focus on the Family. And so that really shaped the culture of my upbringing and of what we believed in our home and what was acceptable in our home and kind of the worldview that we had. In 91, Focus on the Family transplanted to Colorado Springs. And Colorado Springs has kind of become, or at least in that time, I would say it's changing some now, but at least at that time, was very much the epicenter of Christian ministries. Focus on the Family, Compassion International, the Navigators, New Life Church, it just kind of became this hub. And so the whole culture just kind of permeated the city. My mom homeschooled us from the very beginning on. K through 12, I was homeschooled all the way. And that was very much a cultural thing that the evangelical Christians of Colorado Springs did as a way to, I think in many aspects, keep them kind of cocooned in their Christian bubble and teach them the quote unquote family values or godly values that they wanted them to have, rather than be influenced by the outside world. And so that very much was what my upbringing entailed. My father was heavily involved in a very prominent position at Focus. And then my mom homeschooled us and kind of became this, I would say, a leader within the homeschool community. And so I had kind of this balance from both ends of I've got a father in a high-powered position, I've got a mother who's a leader in the community, and here we are, this model family of perfection, right? Or so it seemed, or people to believe. But of course, that is not always the case and not always as things appear. And I don't think I felt that pressure to perform as much in my young years and in my elementary years. But certainly as I got older, I started to feel that pressure of kind of keeping up the family name and honoring the family name. And then you have things like purity culture that heavily influenced my upbringing. And I had, in fact, on my 13th birthday, this whole purity ceremony where all of my family and friends came from states around, they came all the way from Montana down to be present for this coming of womanhood ceremony. And it was very symbolic. It was this whole kind of transition into this next phase of your life. But the goal of it, again, was to keep you sexually pure until you married your husband. And it kind of taught this belief of if you just do the right things and you honor God with your life, eventually your knight in shining armor is going to come in on a white horse and carry you off to your happily ever after. Mm-hmm. And of course, I wanted to please God and I wanted to please my family and I wanted to be a good role model for others. And so, of course, that's what I did. I didn't know any different. I even remember my parents asking me at one point if I wanted to go to public school. And I said no, because I was able to fast track. I was able to do it. I I ended up graduating high school at 16 and getting my associates by 18, which people think is like so like smart and noble, but I really feel like it probably wasn't the best decision, looking back, because in so many ways I was maybe fast-tracked education, but when I got older and started realizing some of these social skills and experiences that I had missed, even simple things like pop music, and that, like I only knew CCM, contemporary Christian music. Like that was my world. I knew nothing outside of it. So I felt like I like at one point I started even just watching. I probably wasn't until I was in my early 20s, but started watching things like American Idol and The Voice just to get exposure to other kinds of music that everybody else seemed to know but me. And so there was all these pockets of things that I missed out on, that I didn't know what I didn't know. Obviously, I didn't know I was missing out. I didn't know I was lacking some of those exposure things. But one of those big things was the exposure to diversity, like you mentioned in that quote that you read at the beginning. Everybody in my world was exactly like us. They were straight, they were cis, they were white, they were Christian, they were, and so there was no diversity, no exposure to that, and certainly not any exposure to the LGBTQ community. They were, of course, the furthest thing from what you should ever possibly be. And so that really, I think, hindered my ability to even understand or recognize my sexual orientation earlier on in life. Because looking back now, I can see it from like very early childhood. But it wasn't until my early 20s that I started realizing that and putting pieces together, because I had no exposure. I had no vocabulary. I had no dating experience. And I just kept believing that I would just do the right thing. And someday I would meet that right guy that would be my husband, that we would most likely be in ministry. I'd be a pastor's wife and raise kids and homeschool them and do the whole thing all over again. I really didn't have any knowledge or experience to help me understand myself or the world around me. It really cocooned me in this bubble of what was supposed to be safe. And so when I did, and I don't know how far you want me to go into the story now, but in terms of recognizing my sexuality, it wasn't until I was in my early 20s and I fell in love with my roommate, who was a female. And it was kind of this epiphany of horror, because suddenly I am feeling things that I've never felt before, because I've never dated before. And I'm feeling them for a woman, which I knew was very, very wrong, even though I didn't have, I knew that much. I knew you weren't supposed to feel those things. But I didn't have any exposure to a gay person to be able to talk to or to ask questions or anything like that. So it really caused my mental health to spiral. I already had, from fairly early on, probably about 13, some mental health struggles in terms of anxiety and depression and things that my parents, tried to help with Christian therapy, Christian counseling, because needing therapy in itself was seen as a negative thing, that you were doing something wrong, or you weren't praying hard enough, or you weren't trusting God enough. And so those things were not viewed in a positive light. And so I learned to hide those pieces of me that were not okay. And I learned to stuff them, and I learned to put on the mask of happy in front of everybody all the time. And that came at a cost, because those things buried deep within me and created a lot of inner turmoil, and probably internalized homophobia at that time, even though I didn't realize it. And those things turned into patterns of self-harm and eventually suicidal ideation, because when I started actually having feelings for this roommate who was a woman, I just spiraled, because that was like the one thing you were never supposed to be. On the hierarchy of sin, that was as bad as it got. And so I kind of took this spiral of, well, you can't have both. And it felt excruciating, this war inside of me to try and choose between my faith and my love for God and this other part that I couldn't seem to understand or change. And that sent me down a very dark spiral. And I think it was when I finally realized I'm going to either have to look this in the face, or it's going to be the thing that kills me, that I started looking outside of my box. and I started looking for answers, and I started seeking things out outside of what I had been taught my whole life to believe, which I think is one of the faults of evangelicalism, is kind of spoon feeding theology and never allowing people to question. They're the top authority, right? They're speaking on behalf of God, and how dare you question that? So it wasn't until I started to actually question that and look outside of everybody within my bubble that I had known my whole life that I started finding answers. And that was a long process. And it was a process of therapy and of research and of trying to come to terms with myself. And eventually I did, but it took several years of really intense work. And when I got to that point, I knew that I was going to have to tell my family. Like, we were so close in the familial sense of, you do everything together and you are always there for birthdays and holidays and all the things. But on those deeper emotional levels, you kind of just skirt over them and you don't talk about them too much. But I knew that I couldn't continue to. It felt like I was living a double life, because I was finally finding myself and feeling settled in my own skin for the first time. But then I knew I had to not be that around my family. And living that kind of double life is exhausting. And that really wears on your mental health as well. So eventually, once I had come to terms with it, I knew I would have to come out to my family. And so I did in April of 2012. And it went exactly like you would expect it to for a daughter of a prominent, employee at Focus on the Family. I tried to explain to them the journey that I had been on, and specifically the journey that I had taken with God, because I knew that would be their greatest fear. But they didn't. I don't think they heard a lot of what I said. They just heard the fear of, like, this is the thing you can never be. And so, in fact, when I came out to the day I actually came out to them, my dad just looked at me and said, "I have nothing to say to you." And he got up and walked out. And it was like 3 weeks before we spoke again. And I mean, 3 weeks for us was an eternity, because we talked pretty much every day, so that waiting period felt really excruciating. But I was hoping that maybe they would take time to try and understand the journey I had taken, and to try and see things from my perspective, and maybe do a little research of their own. But when we got together, it was just 10 times worse. And they compared me to murderers and to pedophiles and said, "How dare you do this? You're so selfish." And they took away my key to their house that day when I left, and said they no longer trusted me to have access to their home. I mean, it's my story, but it's also the story of so many other queer people who grew up in that evangelical faith. And it didn't get better over time. We had some superficial contact that was really hard and awkward for the first year or two. But they really didn't want to hear anything about my life. You talk about the weather, or you talk about your dog, or just very superficial things. And then there was a lot of passive aggressive behavior that just kind of kept pushing me further and further to the outside, till I knew that I no longer belonged. I mean, it's been a decade now, and I still have no contact with my family. So it's, you hear some stories of families coming around and of doing that work and reconciling with their kids, but then there's others that may never, or never do. And that may be the case with my parents, because of the influence that they've had in the community, which is unfortunate, but it's also been what's propelled me into the work that I do now with so many other people. And I think when I wrote Refocusing My Family, I felt like it was important to be a voice, because, that book is my story. It's my growing up and coming out story. And I felt like it was important to be a voice for other people. And then I think when it published, I quickly realized, like, this is not just my story. I wanted other queer people to not feel so isolated, because I felt so isolated. I thought I was the only one that could ever dare grow up gay in an evangelical Christian family. I felt like the only one. I had no idea that there were other queer Christians out there. And so being able to help other people feel less isolated was important to me. But then I quickly realized, like, this story is our story collectively. A story of harmful theology, a story of mental health, a story of coming out, a story of finding yourself. So that's really what's propelled me into the work that I do now. And I work a lot with LGBTQ people who are in that coming out process and helping them navigate that and navigate their sexuality and their spirituality and find homes of belonging and education and resources. And a lot has changed over the last decade in terms of resources. We've seen a lot of that, but there's still a lot of work to do. So that's I think where my passion comes from is from my own experience and from the people I've met along the way.
That's so lovely. I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciate you sharing all of that because, I know, like, for me with my journey of alcoholism, my past has now become my greatest asset. And the more I share my story, the more it just kind of lights a fire under me because you sort of realize exactly what you're saying. Like, you're not alone and the isolation, is no longer. And what a freedom and what a gift that is. But, but at what a difficult price, and
Right.
I've read the book, so I kind of knew what to expect, but hearing you share it in your own voice was very powerful. And so I appreciate that. And, it's a bummer. I thought, gosh, I wonder if, maybe by now parents come around, right? Yeah. I don't know why I thought that. Maybe
it's probably the most common question I get. So you're not alone.
Like the little Disney girl in me or something like, oh, did you come around yet? But you know what it makes me think of is, there's a parable about, it's a Buddhist parable, and it's about needing to cross to the other side of a river and not having a way to get there. And so building a raft in which to get to the other side. And then once you're on the other side and realize, oh, I actually don't need this raft anymore because I'm already on the other side and I could drag it along with me, but it's going to be heavy and cumbersome, right? So should I drag that along or should I leave it here and just kind of say, hey, thanks for your service, raft, Yes. And so I'm not trying to compare your parents to the raft, but all I'm saying is that, sometimes I feel like that happens is that we can't carry other people's stuff for them because it's not great for our own journey. And, when you found yourself and stepped into that like second half of life, if you want to, like a Father Richard Rohr term, you can't sort of unsee it. You can't go backwards. And at least I can't. And so I know that, it's almost like, well, for sure it's a grieving process, but then it's also I'm super bummed that you're choosing not to come along and be a part of my life and a part of my wife's life. But I'm going this direction, this is me. Yeah. And so that must have been super challenging.
Yeah. And in some ways that pain and that loss never really goes away, like that whole of, and even the loss of what could have been or what should have been, that hole is still, I think, probably forever there. And I think it's a both and, because that hole is forever there. And I would never go back. I would never not do that. Like, coming out was still the best choice I ever could have made. I felt like I came alive when I came out. I found myself. I feel like I've lived two completely different lives. There's like that pre-coming out life and there's the post-coming out life. And it's like, there's been a few times where my paths have crossed with somebody from that previous life. And it's like, my brain doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, what do I do with you? I don't know where to put you in my box, in my brain of pre and post life. So,
yeah. And, and we were just kind of briefly chatting even before I hit the record button. We were talking about the purity culture a little bit, just mentioning it. And I find it so refreshing and interesting and fascinating. And like, I'm not alone. when, reading Josh Harris's apologies for
Mhm.
I Kiss Dating Goodbye and all that. And,
Mhm.
I admire that so much. I think the most powerful thing that I can do is to apologize for, things that I did when I didn't know differently, when I didn't, I'm sure I completely offended like a bunch of people in my faith, and how I presented that faith, I guess I should say, and
Right.
how I went about it. So I find that so admirable, and I love that yes and right at the same time simultaneously, like I have this loss and I'm also this new person, and so
Mhm.
to hold space for both, I guess.
Well, and even with Joshua Harris, like you have the apology, which is beautiful,
Yeah,
and you have the damage that can't be undone, and the
right.
people are still living with that, and so even that can be a both and.
Yep, absolutely. I'm curious to know how you have dealt with uh, judgment from other people.
Hmm.
How were you given any specific tools?
I think judgment has, for me, come down to learning to not care so much about what other people think,
Yeah.
because that was really ingrained into me growing up. Everything was about appearances and reputation and what other people thought. And when I first came out, I think I still really wanted that, especially in relation to my parents. I wanted them to see that I was still the same person. I wanted them to see that I was still the same daughter they'd always had. I wanted them to be proud of me. I wanted them to love me. And eventually I had to let go of that,
Mm.
because no matter what I did at that point, it was not going to change them or change their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by doing that, and I can't say that it ever like really goes away, but I think by doing that, you set yourself free, because then you're free from the opinions of others. And some of that I think is definitely a learning process. Like you don't just like flip the light switch and okay, now I don't care what anybody thinks. But for me, I think it's been a journey, and with my chronic health issues, it's also been a journey, because I've had to be that person that sometimes can't do things or sometimes can't go places or has to have things done differently or accommodations, and speaking up for those things, and especially with an invisible disability, because when you look healthy and fine, and so people assume that you are because they can't physically see it, with a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, or and the truth is some days I use those things and some days I don't, and you may see it or you may not, or I may look healthy, or I may be in a wheelchair at the airport and then have to stand up and walk to the bathroom because there's nobody there to push me, but I can't actually access the entire airport by myself with, so those kind of things have been a learning curve for me in my journey of both coming out and navigating chronic illness, to just realize that I have to advocate for myself and for what I need, because I'm the only one that's going to pay the consequences if I don't. That doesn't affect anybody else. They just keep moving on with their lives, right? Like I'm the only one that has to live with those consequences and the outcome. And so learning to set those boundaries and not worry so much about what other people think journey, but I think it does in turn set us free.
So, so true. And so much of what you're saying, I mean, I could say like ditto, I get it, ditto, I get it, because, even hearing you talk about the way bumping into other people, from your, I'll call it, previous part of your life, previous season, just kind of your brain almost doesn't know what to do with it. I've had that experience so many times because I can sort of revert back to that language. And then I feel like, oh yeah, I'm blessed and I'm this and that. And I'll start to do that. And not that that's wrong or bad, but it's just a funny, like, what's going on here, and how do I feel
Mm-hmm.
about this? And,
Mm-hmm.
and similarly, like I've had to try and embrace, and some days I'm better at it than others, but the people who mind don't really matter in my life. They're sort of in those real outer layers, of the circle. And the people who matter, to my life and who God has placed in my life, they don't seem to mind. They seem to accept me how I
Mhm.
am.
Mhm.
And I love that you mentioned the hierarchy of sin too, because, on one hand, I don't know if you were told the same thing, but I was always told growing up, there's no sin that's greater than another until
Until there is.
right, right.
It's like, I was thinking yesterday of like, because my mom would always tell me, Amber, friends will come and go, but your family will always be there for you. So it's like family is everything until you're gay.
Right.
And then suddenly there's a condition there. There's a caveat that they didn't quite talk about before.
Yeah. 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 And, I think too, what's so fascinating is the whole, I love, and you talked about this in depth in your book, and I loved it. The whole concept of, quote, Christian counseling, unquote, that
Mm-hmm.
was not by
Mm-hmm.
licensed professionals. And
Mm-hmm.
so then, you have sort of these lay people who are either, paid a little bit by the church or are volunteers and essentially have no professional background whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
but they're there to give us all counseling. And it's just this terrifying concept to me now,
Yes.
and
Yes.
yeah, and I
That
just,
does so much harm in itself.
man,
The
doesn't it
stigma
ever?
that we have put on mental health,
Hmm.
then
Yeah,
people don't get help when they need it. And or until it's really, really severe. And because there's this stigma and there shouldn't be.
right. Yeah. I even remember just hearing you talk about this. I remember when I was fresh back from rehab, I went to have a visit with the pastor's wife of the church that we were going to, my family was going to. And her main concern was that when I would go to my 12-step meetings, that I would specify that my higher power was Jesus. Like she wanted, that was her main, like, don't forget, you got to do this, you got to show up this way. And it was
Make
like,
sure everybody knows.
I'm like, did you hear anything I just said? Like, that's not my concern right now, just kind of like, so typical, evangelical. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't mean to be bashing like the church, but it's just kind of a funny, ironic, I think sometimes, the cart is put before the horse.
Miss what's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What is your relationship with God like now?
It's been, I think, an evolution for me since I came out. Um, because, of course, in my growing up in the evangelical years, everything was in this neat and tidy little box. Everything was certain. You knew the answers to everything all the time. It was black and white. It was easily defined. And then, of course, realizing that I was gay kind of blew that box up open. And I was never allowed to doubt or to question or to wonder. And I had found an affirming church when I was kind of in those few years of really digging deep and doing research and therapy and things. And that church was the first place that I was ever allowed to really ask questions, or to doubt or to say I didn't know. And that used to be very terrifying to me and has since become very comforting. And so I think when you have people that have a coming out story similar to mine, or probably any variety of experiences, you, I think, have one of two situations. Either whatever happens, the coming out or whatever it is that happens, immediately repels you from the church because you've been so wounded and traumatized. And then kind of over time, sometimes people find their way back because they miss the community or whatever, or maybe they never do. And then you have other ones who like really try to hold on to that faith because they don't want to lose it. And so they kind of take these like baby steps, and still want to, I'm out, but I still want to be involved in my church because they love me and this is where I've always been and this is my family and community, and so it's like kind of this slow migrating away. And I think for me, I identified more with that kind of slow process, because I didn't ever just like say, okay, I'm done with God, I'm done with faith, I'm done with church, I'm done with, it's kind of been a slow evolution over time. And I think the important thing of what I do now is helping people navigate that space of sexuality and spirituality, and realize that you can have both, if you want to, or if you don't, that's okay too. Like, my goal is never to like take somebody out of evangelicalism and arrive them at another version of, Christianity or whatever. I want them to realize that there's freedom to experience God whatever way feels most comfortable to them, and not have to be inside the four walls of a church, which often for queer people anymore it is not, because they've been so traumatized. And that they can find that in community with other people, or they can find it out in nature, or they can find it in any variety of ways that feel comfortable for them, because God is everywhere, and God does not reside simply inside of a church building. Often that's where people end up being hurt the most. So I would say for me personally, I was involved in kind of more progressive faith churches and communities for probably, I've been out about 10 years. I would say probably like maybe 7 of those years. And in the last few years with pandemic, obviously I haven't been as involved. And at this point, I feel more like it's more meaningful for me to have these kind of conversations, right? Like these conversations around faith and humanity and life, with other people. That feels more life-giving to me, and being out in nature has always made me feel close to God. And so I feel like that is more meaningful for me at this point than to sit in a church building in a pew and feel like I have to go check the box every week because that's to do my thing. It doesn't hold the same meaning for me. And I feel like I've found more triggers as time has gone on. I've been more triggered by those spaces, and I still work in them quite frequently. But in terms of going to a church building on a weekly basis, that's not something that I'm currently doing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm in a similar place, and I love how you said you're sometimes more triggered by those spaces. That's how I feel too. And it's tough, I think, especially because I don't know, I've got kids and there's some cognitive dissonance or something in me that's kind of like, well, wait a minute, you need to be taking them to church. Well, who says? And really, if I pump the brakes in those moments and I just sort of step back, I go, okay, but isn't it more important that I'm talking about this with them? Sharing my process and my struggles. Yeah. And who knows, what the future holds. I don't know, but I know that like, being open to it has been key, whatever it is, just being open to it. And that for me has been huge because like you, being brought up in this culture of certainty, right? Having to know the answers at all times for everybody. It sort of brought a sense of safety into my life. If I always had an answer to give to somebody else or to get somebody else, some kind of something that they wanted to hear. And yeah, I don't have that anymore. But what's funny and ironic is that I'm totally like in this place where I'm okay sitting in the questions now. And I never had that before. So it is very liberating.
It is. To just say, I don't know, but I'll sit here and hold space with you.
Yeah.
It's really comforting about that and really freeing, I think.
Absolutely.
To evolve and to change and to just be open to learning and growing. And I don't think that as long as we're open to it, I don't think that ever stops, which I love, because before it felt like you have all the information right here and it just stays right here forever, and now it's like, no, I can continually learn and evolve and grow and change. And that's a continual lifelong process. And I think there's something really beautiful and freeing about that.
So true. So true. And, similarly, when I was in the process of getting sober, I just wanted to kind of hit pause on the TV screen and then just kind of go away and get better. And then
Mm-hmm.
just, come back and then hit pause again and like, oh, look, I'm this new person, right? But like many of us do, it's like, no, I had to recover out loud, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty that was found in that, and I definitely see that in your story as well. It's like, it's not a clean, linear process, sort of getting through all of this stuff. It's messy and it's yucky and it can be super uncomfortable and,
Mm-hmm.
days where it's like, oh man, is this worth it? Maybe I just should have kept in secret, kept hiding or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sort of know that absolutely wasn't going to be a long-term choice, but
Right.
yeah, it's just a fascinating concept and just getting used to being okay, feeling uncomfortable, and then
Mm-hmm.
knowing that that will pass,
Mm-hmm.
or hoping, in the
Right.
moment,
Right.
yeah, that'll
Yeah.
pass. Yeah.
And
Oh,
hopefully having a few good people with you along the way to remind you. Like,
so true.
so grateful for those friends who are like, I'm here and this is temporary. Like you're going
Yeah.
to get this, it will get better, it will change, it will not always feel like this.
Yeah. And I loved in refocusing my family when you were talking about the couple who stepped in to kind of be your parents at the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
That was just beautiful.
Well,
I'm
we've had a lot of people stepping up, especially with things like free mom hugs and mama bears, that are doing such incredible work to kind of, I mean, you can never replace, like you can never just step in and be what that person, who raised you was. It doesn't fill that gap, but it does help. And so things that, the like the moms that are showing up at pride parades and giving hugs and that kind of thing, but they're also making care packages and blankets and sending them in the mail and making phone calls and standing in at weddings and doing these things to try and fill some of that gap, fill some of the holes a little bit. And I think it's just really beautiful work that they're doing. I think it's making a big difference.
mm, yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. I know that I don't know, I want to call it pray away the gay, but that wasn't it. There was something that, a lot of parents were going to back in the day when I was in sort of high school and in junior high school, and
Conversion therapy.
right. And to, see how far some of the older generation has come. It's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. It's
Mm-hmm.
so inspiring and it makes me so happy. And I mean, I guess this is like, well, this is the perfect actual segue to talk about what you're doing today. And I would love to hear all about it because this is so crucial. It is so crucial for people to know that they're not alone if they're questioning or if they know they're gay, right? And so I would
Mm-hmm.
love to hear about it.
Yeah, so I've got a couple different projects going on. The Unashamed Love Collective was kind of my pandemic baby because the world shut down and suddenly you couldn't tour and you couldn't speak and you couldn't be with people in person, right? Which is what I love doing. I love when I get to sit in a room with other people and share my story and hear their stories and share space with them. That's one of my favorite things. And so not being able to do that suddenly and having everybody isolated in their homes, you had this effect of, LGBTQ people who were already feeling isolated, even more isolated, or being suddenly having to share a home with their non-affirming parents because they lost their job or they had to pull out of college or they had to do all these things. So it was creating a lot of isolation and mental health concerns and things, especially among the queer community. And so I started an online community for people to start gathering and finding one another and meeting each other in that space. And it started kind of as a book club. So we choose one book every month that's either written by an LGBTQ person or an allied author. And we read that book and discuss it. We have a platform where we post discussion questions every week. And so we discuss it throughout the month. And then at the end of the month, we meet online virtually through a Zoom platform. And we discuss in small groups. And then we have a live interview with the author. And so that's really fun because we get to meet the author of the book that we've read. We get to talk with them. We get to do Q&A. And so it's been really fun to be able to do that and to have those discussions. But what I think has been even more beautiful is the community that people are building in that space. Because we've got people from coast to coast. We've got people in Canada. We've had several people from around the world. And it's incredible to see them finally feeling safe, because it's not just for queer people. We've got parents with gay kids in there. We've got allies in there. And so it's kind of this collective space where people are able to show up sometimes as themselves for the first time and feel safe to be all of them, or feel safe to ask questions, or feel safe to celebrate something that's really exciting that maybe their family is not celebrating with them, or to grieve something that is really hard that maybe nobody else in their life gets. And we've seen some really beautiful connections that even though this community is spread out, they are finding ways to connect. So when they do travel now, it's like, oh, I'm in your town. Can we meet up and have lunch? And, oh, you're getting married? Well, I'm going to be passing through there. Can I come to the wedding? And, oh, you're evacuating from your house because of the hurricane? Well, I don't know you. We just met online 2 weeks ago, but you can come stay at my house. And so it's just been really, really beautiful to see the way that even this small community is showing up for each other and creating like these connections that are so meaningful. And I think that's been one of the most rewarding things, is because people feel like they have this family now inside this community. And so it's really been a beautiful thing. It's a paid membership, so people pay $30 a month to be a part of it. But it also keeps the trolls away and the people that want to cause stress or chaos. And so it means that they're invested in it and they're invested in the community. And it just really is a beautiful thing. So for that, we only open it to new members twice a year. That way you're in for the full season, and it's closed and people can feel safe in there and not have to worry about kind of this constant flux of people coming and going. So once you're in for the season, that you're in for the season, and people can get to know one another and kind of feel safe in that space. And so our next season will open up for registration right after the first of the year, and then it will launch March 1st. And our lineup of authors for next season will be posted right after the first of the year as well. But that's been one of my favorites things during the pandemic, is just to see the way that people have really connected with each other.
That's amazing. So important. And then when you do the book club, do you also have, I'm trying to picture how that how it works online in terms of, do you have kind of some breakout topical sessions for people to get to know each other, or do you go around and everybody can kind of check in?
We do a break. So for our meeting at the end of the month, we do small group breakouts. So groups of like 4 or 5 people, and you send them to breakout rooms, and we give them guided discussion questions to kind of guide their conversation with one another, so that it's kind of focused around the content of the book. And then we'll come back together as a large group and kind of talk about any highlights that came out of the discussion before we welcome our author. But then we also offer like mid-month hangouts so that people can get together on Zoom halfway through the month and just hang out and chat. So there's not really a structure to it. They just get to hang out, they get to talk, they get to laugh, they get to build community, they get to share things. And so that's kind of a fun place for people that are just needing to get together or play games in the middle of the month or whatever they want to do online. And we've got a couple of volunteers to help host that, which is really neat.
I love that. I love that.
And then going into like the holiday season, like now we'll have our 3rd year of Secret Santa. So we'll do a Secret Santa online. And so that people that maybe don't have family and don't get to do much for the holidays can engage in this and get a gift and receive a gift. And so it's been one of people's favorite things that keeps coming back every year, which I love.
That's such a good idea.
It's super easy to do online. You just use like Elfster and you set it up and people can sign up and you put a limit on it, and then it like it picks names for you and generates them, and you put a deadline. And it's the last 2 years that we've done it, it's gone really well. And people have already been asking me about it for this year. Like, when is it coming? When do we get the info? When do we, so that's really neat to see that people are excited about doing it again.
That is flippin' brilliant. I love it. I love it so much. Yeah, and this whole thing, Amber, like the whole question of what does the church look like going forward, which
Mm-hmm.
who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like, gosh, it would be great, for them to sort of create a safe space like that
Mm-hmm.
for, people who, or I guess church members, church parishioners, attenders, whatever. And it's just, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I have not seen it. And like with
Well,
authenticity.
yeah. Well, and a lot of times when I describe the collective, people are like, "Oh, so it's like online church," and I'm like, "No, yeah, but kind of like what the church is supposed to be."
Right.
But don't call
Right.
it that. But yes, but no.
Yeah.
And I think,
Totally.
that's, if I can segue into the other project then that I'm doing,
Yeah.
that is the Cultivating Community Retreats. And that's just launching. That was a pre-pandemic dream of bringing together small groups of people in like-minded communities to build connection with each other in person over a 4-day weekend and have structured events that really help them build community with one another. And I didn't plan for it to really become something that was ongoing. It was something that I was feeling because of kind of the loneliness and isolation, kind of like what you and I were talking about before we started recording, of just feeling like we work in these silos in our homes and we see other people a couple times a year, but it's not enough to really fuel us to feel like we have the support that we need to go ongoing. And so I kind of did it out of my own need and desire to be with other like-minded people. And then we had it, and it was amazing, and it was magical, and people arrived as strangers and left as family, and it was just so incredible. And then I had somebody come to me with some money and was like, "Do you want to do that again?" And I was like, "Yes." And so we just did it again a few weeks ago, and it was incredible again with a new group of people. And so in the coming year, I'm launching it. And in fact, the first one I'm doing is in March for creatives, for people like you and I that do podcasts and books and music. And so I'm gathering. It's limited to 15 people, and we gather in like a luxury hotel style home for the weekend and build community with one another. And so I'm launching several of those this next year, but the first one will be specifically for creatives. And all the information is on my website. But I'm really excited about kind of this new aspect and way of bringing people together in an in-person way of building community that they can then keep in touch and continue to support one another in the work that they do moving forward and feel re-energized.
That's so beautiful. I love that idea because there is something that just kind of builds connective tissue, even just being out of one's normal space and being in person together and being able to, let each other's kind of light refract off of each other and something really special that happens.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the group of 15 that we've had both years has been like the perfect number because it's just big enough to have the diversity that you need, but small enough that you can sit in a room together and have really meaningful conversations and be vulnerable and show up for one another and really like create relationships that last.
I love it so much. A far cry from having to be super polished and put together and
Yes. Yes.
in
Yes,
your
it's the opposite. It's the antithesis of that.
Exactly. And this is sort of random, but looping back to that, I was thinking about the whole concept of the judgmental. I don't know if judgmentalism is a word. I don't know if it's judgmental. Yes. I'm not sure. Right. But I have conversations with people now sometimes in my world who are kind of, well, they'll want to debate something like this. And I'll say that, I think it's very easy to judge something that we don't struggle with, right? That's kind of like the thing of the church. I mean, if you are a heterosexual, white person in the church, yeah, it's like we were taught, at least at my church, it wasn't okay to be anything sort of outside of that, or it was with these following stipulations. And it was like just a different bag. So, you quickly sort of learned what you could share and not share, and what was safe and not safe.
Yes.
So I love hearing about this work that you're doing, because it's so important. It is so vitally important, for people to be able to come and feel safe and feel like, they're not going to be judged, because unfortunately, some of us still have that sensitivity stuff going on sometimes, depending on our, whatever it is going on in our lives. Right. But like, to be able to have a community where you can go and talk that through even, what a gift. So thank you so much for that, for the work that you're doing. It just sounds incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been really neat to see the way that people show up for each other when given the opportunity, and the space to do it.
I just want to say, Amber, that I see you as a bridge builder, like a very, very important bridge builder. And I want to just say how much we need people like you to continue to, be there to encourage and to inspire. And I know that for me, what I was searching for in the bottle was really just connection. And in those dark, days of feeling like nobody else understood and could understand, and I was sick of me, like that's how much it hurt, was I was sick of me. Just to have somebody else, say, hey, I've been there too, or have that empathy.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
So your honesty of spirit, Amber, and the way that you so clearly are able to share and then bond with people, it's a gift. I know that you've worked hard and been through a lot to have earned your seat doing this. So I just want to thank you so very much for sharing your story today, for coming on. Still fangirling up in here. So thanks for putting up with me. And I wish you all the very best. I just send you so much love and light. And I hope that we get to talk again.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And so in closing, I would like to say that I would love for us to all be kind, to rewind. I thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. Keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.